Hello, my name's Galena. I'm the fiance of Joshua Lee McCollister, who was murdered on July 8th by Deunn Willis and robbed by Danielle Durand. I've had some people today ask if we loved each other so much, essentially, what was he doing up in Humboldt County? It's really difficult to talk about the stalking that we were undergoing in Mendocino County. We both had this attitude that they have to get tired at some point. You know, that they have to get bored. And they never did. You know, if you've ever lived through stalking, you know, there's the moment where you realize that you're being stalked. And usually by the time you notice that you're being stalked, you've actually been stalked for a while. So exactly when this person decided that they were going to start hurting us, I really don't know, but it was a long time before we caught on. So I know it was January where we realized that we had a real serious problem. But still, we used to say, you know, if they just leave us alone, we'll forgive everything if they'll just let us go. And they never did. Like, 4 days after he was dead, one of them messaged me. And this is after I sent out a cease and desist letter, like, please don't contact me. You know, and of course they still do. You know, it's really just undescribably painful to think about what Joshua Lee McCollister was enduring in Mendocino County, that got to the point where he felt safer sleeping under a bridge there than he did at a motel room in Fort Bragg. There's too much to talk about the stalking in one video, but I wanted to say one thing. The people that were doing it is mainly 2 people in Fort Bragg that were doing this, and we just, man, did we think they'd just let us go at some point, just leave us alone. But they knew us. They knew a lot about us. They knew what things we were afraid of. They knew what traumas we'd been through that they could exploit. And 2 things about Josh that they knew. So they understood that he was autistic. They knew that very well. And they used it to their advantage. Like, he'd get portrayed as though he was mentally ill. He wasn't mentally ill. He was autistic. There's a big difference between those 2 things. But they were able to portray him to other people as though he was this guy who was just nuts, and he was just autistic. And he was trying to get help from the local, he was trying to get resources from the local places in Fort Bragg, and they just weren't helping him. The other thing is, Josh was a cancer survivor, and they knew this. They also knew that the form of cancer that he had was particularly aggressive, and he'd beaten it before, but he was afraid that it had come back. And that if it had come back, he probably didn't have a year to live. I mean, it was... You know, when you're fighting cancer, you're supposed to be able to just, like, relax and focus on your health. But Josh was such an old school man. I used to compare him to a silverback gorilla. I'd show him videos, you know, how protective a silverback gorilla is of his wives and his babies. That was Josh in a nutshell. You know, if there was danger, he was going to jump in front of anybody else there. He wanted to take the hit before anyone else did, and he never called me his fiancé, he called me his wife. I remember one time in the living room, he was just in a just absolute panic, because, he's muttering over and over, they're coming for my family, they're coming for my family. And he didn't know what to do to protect us. And he didn't care about getting killed. He cared about what would happen to his wife, what would happen to his babies. That's all he thought of. But the problem was, he wasn't the target. I was. He could have just left. He could have just left. And they would have left him alone. And yeah, it all has to do with my dad. Duh, of course it does. My dad wasn't the person stalking us, but that was the motive. That's why Josh was up from Southern California in the first place. He'd never been to Fort Bragg, he'd never been to Mendocino County. But he saw my photograph. 14 years ago, Josh saw my photograph. And he fell in love. As crazy as that sounds, that's what happened. He loved me from afar for like 14 years. So he heard that I was in danger, and he just dropped everything. He dropped his entire life to come protect me, to come be my bodyguard. And so when these people were stalking, he understood I was the target. He understood that he was just the obstacle that they would have to overcome to get to me. And he wasn't going to let that happen. At the same time, though, I loved him. And I understood that if his cancer had come back, I had to get him out of Mendocino County. And there was oncology, a neurology up in Eureka. I wanted Josh to be where his cancer could get treated. And so I told him, baby, I need you to go up to Eureka and check out the lay of the land, see if the people who are stalking us could still get us up there. I need you to tell me if it's a good place to raise kids. And so that's why he went, because I asked him to. I asked him to go see if it was a good place to raise kids. And he did it for me. And when I saw him at the coroner's office, that's actually one of the things I asked the coroner when I was sobbing and crying and could barely hold myself together, as I asked if Josh's cancer had come back. Because I knew that they had opened him up in that part of his body. And I still don't know if his cancer had come back. No one should find out if their loved one was going to die in a year from cancer because someone else decides to shoot them. When Deunn Willis pulled that trigger, he just made sure that that last year of Josh's life never happened. Josh should have died in his bed somewhere. Or maybe he wouldn't have. Maybe he would have been able to fight. Maybe chemo would have worked. I don't know. I would have been there for every day of it. I know that. And we should have had those days. And as much as I hold Deunn Willis and Danielle Durand accountable for that, he never would have had to go north at all if these people had just not stalked us. And that's why it's not just me that holds these stalkers accountable for his murder. His parents do, his friends do, heck, everybody I talked to up in Humboldt that he was friends with, they all knew about the stalking situation, and they held those people accountable also, because he didn't deserve any of it. He was a good man that was trying to protect his woman and trying to protect the kids that he wanted to legally adopt. He was trying to protect his family. But that's why he wasn't humbled. It wasn't because he abandoned me, he didn't love me, or anything like that. Heck, I got my last correspondence from him 2 hours before he was murdered. And that was him showing off the puppy that he'd gotten the kids. He loved me every day, and I loved him every day. And I still do. And that's why I want to make sure that Deunn Willis and Danielle Durand get the maximum penalty for what they did. Because they destroyed our lives. They absolutely did. They're not the only ones. Those people that stalked us, you know, I got a message from one of them 4 days after Josh was killed, saying that they didn't mean to hurt anybody. Yes, you did. Don't tell me you're going after someone who's facing cancer the way you did. Don't tell me you're going after someone who is autistic in the way you did. And you knew that about him. Don't tell me you were doing that and not meaning to hurt anyone. I think everybody out there that's ever faced cancer knows how ridiculous that is. Because everyone out there that's faced cancer knows you need calm, because that calm affects your health. You absolutely meant to hurt him. And you absolutely meant to hurt me. And the only reason that you're saying anything other than that now is because you're terrified that you're going to be named publicly. And that all the things you did to us publicly are going to become public knowledge. You're not going to go to prison for what you did. But you damn well deserve to be in prison, right alongside Deunn Willis and Danielle Durand. You absolutely do.